Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Also, thanks, Stephanie, for messing up podiatric again, because I always get really nervous going into these. I'm going to say something silly, and you kind of took the edge off, so that's really appreciated. So anyway, moving forward. So as Stephanie mentioned, today we're really going to talk about how to use ExamSoft as formative assessments. And I'll actually talk a little bit about using it as a summative assessment in a clinical setting. So today's session, I'm not going to talk too long. I promise I'll be really nice and concise. But I'm just going to kind of go through the background info at our school, the issues that we faced, and our experiences of solving these issues, and how we use ExamSoft to do that. I'll kind of hit on some helpful tips and tricks that we learned throughout the process, and where we're going with this moving forward. As we learn more throughout this process, we see more opportunities to improve the process, and just kind of share what we're doing next, and what our anticipated outcomes are for that. And then, of course, we'll close with questions, as Stephanie mentioned. So with that being said, we can hop into today's objectives, which are there on the screen. And really, those first two are the two main points that I really want to focus on throughout today. Is just how are we using ExamSoft, and how are we using these formative assessments to fill the instructional gaps in clinical scenarios, and then also how are we using them to map our curriculum? How are we using it to kind of complete that process? So we had a couple of needs that we identified, and these were we were able to use these formative assessments to meet these needs. And at the end of the day, the hope would be that the participants would be able to implement their own formative assessments, and use these, whether it's a clinical setting or any other off-site venture that you have within your curriculum. So very quickly, just some the background information on our school. So at OSU, we are an osteopathic school. We're a 4-year undergraduate medical program. We have about 110, 120, somewhere in there per class. And so years 1 and 2 are just didactics. They're in the classroom, and it's pretty standard lecture-based course. We have a systems curriculum. And then 3 and 4 are clinical rotations, those years. And so the task at hand was really in years 3 and 4, and almost most specifically year 3, in how we were going to integrate these assessments to be part of the curriculum to achieve these goals. With that being said, we did have a couple hurdles that we identified, and that at this point we didn't know we were going to use ExamSoft to get over these hurdles. I chose the picture because the gentleman in the red is really reminiscent of my track and field career. So anyway, the two main issues that we had were enhancing our students' learning experience. So in the clinical scenarios, students can be dependent on the patients that they see, and if patients don't present with certain pathologies, they may not have a full experience, and from month to month, students may have different experiences. So we wanted a way to be able to some degree, standardize these experiences where students are all getting the same content, and it's not just dependent on patient presentation. And we also wanted something beyond just the reading assignments or conversations with the clinicians, but something that we could actually have, that we could measure. And as the point 2 there says, we also want to have something that was showing that we're meeting program requirements, for accreditation, but also going back to point 1, we wanted to make sure that each student was getting out of each clinical rotation the full experience, that they were learning what they were supposed to learn, and ultimately learning what our objectives and goals were pointing toward. So we kind of had both. It was, teaching the students while also, it's important in all schools, and especially medicine, to make sure that you're reaching accreditation. So, and just like backstory, we had our accreditation site visit this year. So this is a hot button topic for us, that we wanted to make sure we achieve these goals. So our experience, it's twofold. So I'll step through a couple slides here and just kind of share our experience and what our solution was, and how we got to that solution. So as an osteopathic school, osteopathic manipulative medicine is a big part of each of our rotations. So we had to make sure that this was something that was addressed in each of our rotations. So we had some of the points that we had to hit on is, A, how are we implementing this? How are we making sure O&M is a part of each rotation? And also, more importantly, how do we prove that we're doing it? So, we could have our clinicians say, oh, yeah, I covered that, or I had a conversation with students on that. But that's not, really, empirical evidence that, yeah, we are doing this in our rotations. And also, we wanted to make sure that our students were and are learning that information, receiving it, and being able to use it going forward so that those rotations are a meaningful experience for them. And so that's when we came to the solution of let's use ExamSoft and implement assessments that we can track, A, to make sure they are being implemented, B, that students are performing well, and C, just having a computer-based exam made it much easier for our department, which is where the Office of Educational Development, our department being able to assist in this process, even though we have clerkships and rotations all over the area and the state even. So that was a task as well that we felt like that having the computer-based testing was best served because we didn't have to worry about any paper trail. There was no copying and emailing or, God forbid, faxing. There was none of that. It was something that we were just able to handle completely electronically. One other perk to this for us was that we're dealing with our third-year students who had just gone through our first two didactic years here. So they were very comfortable with ExamSoft and using it, even troubleshooting issues when they arose in their computer. They were used to using it on their machine, and they knew how their computer responds to using ExamSoft. So we really didn't have technical concerns with this either, just because the student as a user was so familiar with the product that we were using. So in this scenario, we distributed an OMM quiz for each rotation each month. So in every rotation outside of OMM, because that's their focus, outside of our OMM rotation, they have a quiz that's available to them each month that the student has to complete by the end of the month. I'll go through here in a couple slides about how the roles that faculty and staff and the students play in all this, but just at a base level, the quiz is made available to them for a specific time frame, and then it's the student's job on their own time to get the quiz done. Different clerkships treat this differently, so we'll have some rotations that always will remind their students to make sure they take it by a certain date. Other ones just say, hey, get it done, and we'll get the results at the end of the month, and then we'll talk about it then. So each rotation does have their own autonomy on how they want to implement this, but the main point of this is to make sure that they are preparing the students for the quiz, and that the students should be doing, and therefore that assessment is making sure that in our clinics our students are learning the OMM portion of what they should learn in each rotation, and then this assessment is making, it's just assuring that we're teaching them appropriately. It's assuring us that the students are appropriately preparing for those materials as they move for the next step of their boards. So it's just a great way for us to create oversight to that process, while also creating some accountability for students that they know that they need to study up and be prepared for this information as a part of each rotation. So that part of the solution, as far as creating accountability for our clerkship coordinators, our clinicians, and our students, was a big part of this quiz, and it's really been a successful part to make sure that students are highlighting that part of their experience in each rotation. And I'll talk a little bit about the logistics of how we do that specifically. Now, the other portion of this that I mentioned in the objectives is that we had a desire to introduce students to the more instructional material than what they just see with patient interactions. And in this current institution, at the podiatric institution I was at, students were given assignments while they were on their rotations. However, having this assessment that we can get feedback on, provide feedback to students, and also have our own internal statistics on, was something that we really wanted to implement as a way, again, of creating accountability that students are learning the material, and B, also to make sure that they're getting what they should be getting out of each rotation. And if we felt that if they were just given specific assignments without necessarily having the assessment to go with it, that we're kind of doing them a disjustice. It was a disjustice because we weren't holding them accountable for what they should be learning. And secondly, it also allows us, especially with the formative assessments, to highlight for the students what's the important part of each rotation, what you should be taking from this, and allows us to give some feedback to the students throughout the process so that we can make sure that they are learning what they should be learning as they move on to their next rotation. So I guess that kind of covers point 2, that we knew that the assessment would be an important part of the process, and we wanted to engage them in that material. And finally, that the last black bullet point there, it really gives students an opportunity to self-assess, which we really value here. Throughout our first couple of years in our curriculum, we make sure to give students as much feedback on their performance as possible so they can take ownership and accountability of that process. And this is just a continuation of that process. So students know that, I have or have not learned what I should have taken from this rotation. It also helps create some dialogue between the students, which we really value as part of the learning process, that students working together, even if it is post-quiz, just to chat about the questions that came up, and then working with clinicians to discuss those the issues that in the questions, again, to make sure that they get the appropriate feedback necessary to learn the material. So the solutions that we came up to meet those goals of engaging students better and making sure they got the appropriate amount of material are those 3 bullet points at the bottom. We have, and this is different for each rotation, and rotations do have autonomy to implement this how they want. And it seems like just about every year as rotations use this more and more, another rotation jumps on board. So it's really become an important part of the process and a really valued part of the educational process for us here. So we'll have weekly formative assessments, and we have, I think, 3 rotations that currently do that now, where they will actually have the students in a conference room, and they'll take almost more of a formal quiz type setting, where it's a quiet environment, and they're taking a quiz anywhere from 10 to 25 questions. We also have summative assessments at the end of rotations, and that's the same thing. We'll have some that are more formal settings, and students will sit in a conference room or in a classroom and take their quiz, or we'll also have situations where we leave the assessment open to them for a week's time and just say, hey, get it done throughout the week. The assessments that are in a more formal setting, we do make those secure, meaning that students are unable to access the rest of the computer, the internet, any other program, or the ones that are open for a week long, we'll make those non-secure, so students have the ability to leave it open for an extended period of time. We won't set a time limit to it, and they can kind of answer the questions as the week goes on, as they're learning the material. So again, the rotations have the autonomy to do that. And then we do have one rotation recently that implemented pre and post exams for at the beginning, and that's beginning of the month, end of the month, that they'll do these exams to see how students have progressed throughout the month, to make sure that obviously they're learning the course material. With that, I just want to give you a quick screenshot here of this is a small shot of our assessment folders in ExamSoft. And so you can see there, each clerkship has its own folder, and this is obviously a snapshot of our 3rd years. And we have the quizzes in for each folder. Some of these it's not indicated there, but some of these do have several folders embedded within them where we have more exams. We'll break them down by semester, typically, or by year, or even by rotation. It's really dependent on how the rotation wants to do that. We handle this aspect in our department as far as the setup goes. We work with the clerkship coordinators and the clinicians to make sure that we're supplying them with what they need as far as how they want the assessment implemented to students. So anyway, that's just a snapshot of how we organize it. We definitely, each clerkship does have their own area. even the the OMM exam or the quiz that I mentioned that every clerkship uses has their own unique OMM quiz to it. So those will be in their individual folders as well. So now that we kind of talked about why, the educational reasons why we do that, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the roles and how this is actually implemented. So we know the why. We know that formative assessment helps student learning and retention. We know that it gives us an opportunity to engage students in the appropriate content, and for accreditation purposes, we can say that yes, we have engaged students in this content. Yes, we are teaching them. Yes, we're achieving our objectives and our goals for each rotation and therefore each year of our curriculum. But that's but now, like I said, I just want to go through and tell you how we do it. So there's three different roles in this. There's the faculty role, the staff role, and the students. So I have it broken down in a really basic way here with those bullet points, and I'll elaborate a little bit more on how we do that. So with our faculty, and by faculty I mean I'm talking about our clinicians that are in each rotation. They're obviously not on site in our building here, and so we don't expect them to learn ExamSoft and put the questions in themselves. They're quite busy seeing patients and also working with our students in the rotation. So the only thing we ask of them is for the content creation of the quiz or the assessment that they want to implement. So we have those sent to us in advance, and we actually will put those in the system as an instructional design staff, which I know I'm jumping down a point there. Sticking with the faculty role, though, they're also responsible for obviously providing the student feedback. We have the option of sending them feedback through ExamSoft and sending them the rationale that way, and some folks will opt to do that just to make sure students have something in writing. However, after they get the results, it is their job, obviously, to complete we really value feedback as part of the teaching process. So we want to make sure that after students are instructed and assessed, they get feedback on their performance so they can self-assess and improve as necessary. So that's what falls on the clinicians in this process. In our department, as I previously mentioned, we actually create the assessment. So we'll throw those into the question banks form, we'll create the assessment, and we'll make those available to the students. We handle all of the technical aspects of that. I would venture to guess that 5% of our clinicians that are out, in dealing with within our rotations, are ExamSoft users directly. And if you guys are listening to this right now, it's more than 5%. My apologies, but that's my rough estimation. So we also, in our area, we alter the rotation rosters. So we have to make sure that students don't have every rotation's quiz available to them all at once. So instead of changing the quiz, we change the roster for each rotation. So every single rotation has its own roster, and at the beginning of every month when the new rotation starts, we take out the old students, we move in the new students. One nice thing, and I'll touch on this when I go through some of the tips that we've learned throughout the process, is that in the event that you forget to take students out, it's not that big of a deal because they won't see the quiz again if they've already taken it. So that's a nice part of that process that sometimes we'll just end up adding more and more students to the list because there's not much of a point to take them out. It's just kind of a wasteful exercise sometimes. And then it's also our job in our area to send the results to the rotation coordinators. So again, we handle, like I said, every single part of that logistically. We don't handle the grades. That's for them to decipher and put into their grade books in the clinics with their rotations. We literally just handle the logistics within ExamSoft. And then the students obviously have an important role in this besides just taking the quiz. They do at times have to complete assessments on their own time. And again, that's dependent on the clerkship, as I mentioned before. The ones that do have to complete it on their own time, it is expected that they'll be savvy enough within ExamSoft to take the quiz and deal with any issues. Sure, it's technology. If there's an issue with their computer, they know who to contact. If they contact the clinic directly, they'll contact us in our area. So we're able to directly assist the student throughout that process. You know, best case scenario, we tell them to restart their computer. Worst case scenario, they use a friend's computer. They come in and see us, and we give them a computer to borrow. We really have had no issues at all with students completing the quizzes, especially when it comes to technologically and the logistics of this. They're savvy users at this point with ExamSoft, and so you know, once the quiz is out there, they have the password. They're ready to go, and it's really a non-issue. And they can. The nice thing is it allows them just to focus on the content, which is really our goal throughout this process, is to engage them with the content. So technology has not been has only enabled that process. I just in the last year or so that I've been more involved in this process, we've replaced the paper on I think 5 different rotations and gone completely with the computer-based testing, and it's really streamlined the process for everybody. The students appreciate it. It's in an atmosphere in which they're used to testing, and then the rotation coordinators appreciate it because there's no paper trail anymore. It's all within ExamSoft, and we deal with that either in the system or via email. So throughout this process of creating these quizzes, we have learned some helpful tips that I'm going to share now. Most of these were learned through mistakes that we or I've made. So I mentioned a little bit before that when we create these quizzes, we permanently leave them available for students. So we don't change the quiz. We don't change the download for them. We have opened up the download for as long as the system will allow us to when we are using the same quizzes. Obviously, there's times when we're going to either edit the quiz and produce a new one, or there's times when we're going to just create whole new quizzes. But we just keep those available pretty much permanently, and instead we alter the course rosters themselves. We do have with the ones that use weekly quizzes, especially or those summative quizzes at the end of each rotation. They have several quizzes for their students. So we do have to be cognizant that we're only making the appropriate quiz available to each student. Again, we do leave those same quizzes open throughout, and we will edit the courses as need be. So, for example, one of our rotations that I help manage, we have I think I have 5 different course rosters in there, and so I just changed and the one quiz available each course roster. So again, I'm not continuously changing the quiz itself or the download time for the quiz itself. We just go in there and move students in and out of each of those different rosters within that rotation. And as I mentioned before, if there's a little mix-up and you forget to eliminate a student from a roster, it's okay, because as I have the third point there, we just leave one download per student. So once they take it, they don't see it anymore. So it doesn't distract them, and it's really a non-issue for us as well. One tip that was really helpful for the quizzes that we have, the monthly OMM quizzes that I mentioned that we use for every single, that each rotation has to implement, we use a single password for all of those quizzes. So students know, they have a month to take care of it. It's a non-secure quiz. At first, when we were using a unique password for each rotation, we're having to send them out new emails. We all know that students, especially once they get out of first and second year, aren't always the best about their emails, especially if the email's more than like 2 lines. So we had a lot of students emailing asking for the password. Once we went to a single password, then it was a non-issue. Students knew exactly what the password was one time. I think maybe we'll have 1 student per rotation, if that. It's probably 1 student per every 5 rotations that emails us and will ask for the password. Since we made the same, it's really a non-issue. I've already touched on point 4 about rotating students, so I'll kind of skip past that. One thing we learned is set reminders. It's kind of easy with these monthly quizzes it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and then you'll get folks, worst case scenarios when students aren't moved through from one roster to the next, and a quiz is supposed to be available to them and it's not available to them. That obviously is an issue if they can't download it and take it. So we've most certainly learned to set reminders in our email to tell us to do that. There's nothing quite like having a clerkship coordinator call you and say, I have 12 students in here and none of them can download a quiz. And yes, that's happened to me personally, and that's why I set reminders now. So next is if you're going to have the end of rotation exams where you do have 12 students in a room, we always have a support staff and extra computers available for the ones that are in town here. I don't think we have any out of town that actually do a large exam where they all meet in one location and take it. The out of towners typically stick with just a take home variety. So, but if they do have the students in one clinic in one central location, we always make sure that, again, whether it's RIT is really supportive of our efforts with this, so they usually have an individual available. If not, we're all in our department are pretty tech savvy with ExamSoft to make sure that we can troubleshoot when necessary. And if it's a nearby clinic, we'll be proactive and just someone will pop over with a couple extra computers in case there's an issue, just to help take care of that process before anything really comes of it. I think it's very seldom they use those computers, but maybe once every couple months we'll have either a student forget a computer or their computer isn't booting up or they haven't installed updates or whatever it might be. So it's just something that takes the stress away for the student, and also the clerkship coordinators, they're not trained nor are they expected to be trained on troubleshooting ExamSoft. That's just a kind of a service we can provide as a department right now. And finally at the bottom there, students are going to forget their password. It happens all the time, especially when they first get in their first rotation. It's almost like they're so excited when they finish second year, they're done with the didactic exams. They don't want to think about ExamSoft or quizzes or computer tests or whatever again. So we have them forgetting their passwords a lot. So just be prepared to reset passwords. It kind of sounds like a silly little thing, but it happens actually fairly often. So I guess with that, I just want to touch on what we're going to do moving forward. And much of moving forward is really focused for us on mapping and categories within ExamSoft. And if you're new to ExamSoft, categories are just a way of, we can categorize each question by whether it's a specific content or map it to an objective, which we do, as I mentioned, that's the first point there, just to make, to get specific stats on a given area. So if we want to get stats just on questions that are related to OMM or it's a pathology or physiology question we want to focus on, we can get stats that way. For this application of categories, though, we're really looking more at using it as kind of a curricular mapping feature, which we've used in other parts of our curriculum. So what we will with folks at different clinicians, it's kind of a slow process to get folks together, is mapping those rotation assessment items to the goals and objectives of the rotation. So we'll actually make our categories the goals and objectives of the rotation and then map those questions to them. And that's really an effort to complete that curriculum mapping process. We want to make sure, again, that obviously we have objectives for each rotation. We want to make sure our students are meeting, achieving those objectives by the end of each month. And again, one of the best ways of ensuring that is through these assessment items. So that's really paramount to our next step is moving forward, is to make sure that everything is completely mapped and we can prove that we're doing exactly that. Next, we just really want to see if we're appropriately instructing and assessing our students. If we can use the statistical feedback from the categories just to make sure that the educational process and the clerkships are going as expected. Are students being, are we covering the appropriate content? B, is that being covered with them in an appropriate way, whether it's through patient interaction, outside assignments, or reading, clinician interaction. And the best way of doing that, again, is through assessing them and ultimately giving students feedback on that assessment sure that they understand where they are in that process. And again, categorizing that's going to help us with that review process as well. And the last note is kind of the most important note to all of this, is we want to make sure this process is adding value to our student outcomes. So in our department, our goal in supporting our school's mission is to improve student outcomes. And that's kind of the bottom line for anything that we do in our classrooms here or in our clerkships, is to improve student outcomes. In the medical school realm, that's twofold. One, we have to make sure that students are doing well within each clerkship and course. We use exam statistics to prove that and give us data on where and how we should improve. And then also medical students have to take boards. So that's our other measure of student outcomes. So if we can prove through this, we want to build this out more to have more, to make more data-driven decisions, to prove that the methods that we're using in our clerkships of assessing and teaching our students are adding to those student outcomes. And so we do that already in our first and second year courses, and we have a pretty robust system for that. And this is kind of our next venture to make sure we're teaching and assessing appropriately in that third year. And so the anticipation is that we'll learn more about our clerkships there and be able to streamline the instruction and the testing process of that as well. We really don't want this to be a process where students are just jumping through hoops and just taking quizzes for the sake of taking quizzes, but we do want them to be rich learning environments and opportunities for our students as well. So really with that kind of completes my portion of the talk. I do appreciate everyone taking time to join us today. I try to be concise. I also drank a bunch of coffee before this, so I know I talked really fast, so my apologies for that. If you have any questions after the fact, feel free to contact me at my email address or tweet at me there. And I guess this is probably the most important point. As a lifelong Clevelander, my family and friends would be really mad if I didn't say "Go Tribe" at the end of this and hope that we win Game 7 of the World Series tonight. So with that, I am finished. So if you have any questions, we can do that at this time.
Thanks so much, Dan. We do have a couple of questions that have already come in, so that's all right with you?
Sure.
Okay. First question is, how are students responding to the feedback that's different from before you were using ExamSoft?
Well, now we're able to give them more tangible feedback. That's a really good question. Prior to implementing ExamSoft with this, it was more that they would fill the paperwork out and then send it. They would give them their grade and then they'd go on their way. And it might just get they would maybe get their sheet back. Sometimes they wouldn't because they wanted to keep that for for grading purposes. This allows a more free flow of information amongst our department, the clinicians, and the clinical coordinators, and the students. And one other great part of this as well is that we're able to do it in a more timely fashion, which is really important for us to be able to give students that immediate feedback. So that's one part that they appreciate more. So they, once they test, they can know how they did, and more importantly, how they can improve. And so I think that's been the biggest key is the timing element. And also, as we continue to categorize more, we're able to give them more specific feedback about their performance, which is something we value here as well. And the students they've come to appreciate it quite a bit in our first and second year. And so those expectations are increasing in the third and fourth year, that they get that more nuanced feedback about their performance, and not just you got an 80%, but you got an 80%, and this is how it broke down into these different areas of the quiz or test that you took. And that's something that we all have found really helpful from the students through the faculty and staff.
Great, thanks. Next question is, if the quizzes are formative and meant for training, why would a student need to use ExamSoft? Why not create the assessments with other tools that can be practiced over and over again?
Well, the weekly quizzes, for example, we want to make sure that throughout that week they're getting the high points that are being assigned to them. And we found that ExamSoft was the easiest method for doing that, to where they could take the quiz and then get feedback on the following week about their performance, and allow us to scaffold on that week to week. Part of that, I'll be honest, is a logistical thing that we know that the students are savvy users with ExamSoft, having used it for 2 years in the didactic portion of our curriculum. So it really made sense that, as far as student and staff comfort with the product, that just made it an easy way of using it. And also, we can make the quiz available to them multiple times if that is a request of the clerkship. That's one of the reasons why we do the pre-post test with the one as well. So if we want to do that, we can allow them to have extra downloads and just go through and practice that as well. We do engage them through an LMS as well. So if we have something we want them to consistently see, whether it's a presentation or something to work through, we have that available as well. But as far as focusing on our assessment and also being able to map that assessment for curricular purposes, this just seemed to kind of cover both those bases, and that's why we ended up going that route.
Okay, thanks. Next question is, are you pairing the student performance data from these formative assessments with their OSCEs or performance evaluation data? Can this be done within ExamSoft?
It's kind of part of our moving forward ventures, as far as making sure that we're covering, that we're mapping all that material together for students. So we don't we don't put in OSCE information into there. However, one area that we are looking to use with this is the mapping, or the category or mapping feature, and we want to use that in a way that will allow us to map to our goals and objectives, as I mentioned before, but potentially other areas of student performance. We haven't really figured that out necessarily as far as how we'll do that with the categories, because we're really focused right now on making sure that we're assessing them appropriately at the appropriate level, the appropriate material, for us internally and for accreditation. That's kind of something that's also on our radar, and a great idea. We just kind of haven't gotten there with that part specifically, as far as how we use ExamSoft as part of that process.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions that we have today, folks. We really appreciate you attending this afternoon, taking time out of your afternoon, which I know everybody is very busy. Dan, thank you for a really great presentation. Just a couple of quick reminders, everybody. When you do close out of the GoToWebinar panel, you will get a quick survey pop-up. It's 6 questions long. We would really appreciate you just taking a couple of seconds to fill those out. Also, this webinar has been recorded. Everybody should receive an email within the next 48 hours that will have a link to the recording, as well as a link to a PDF version of the presentation deck. So be on the lookout for that, and feel free to share that with whomever you would like. Again, we have a couple more upcoming webinars in the next few weeks, so please feel free to take a look at those, and the registration is at resources.examsoft.com. Again, thanks to everybody for participating today. We will see you next time.